Hello and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. And today I'm going to be joined by my dad. We've got lots of interesting things that we could probably record loads of podcasts about, but today we're going to be talking about Christmas cars. This is a tradition that existed within my family for a little bit, and it's something that I've spoken about on somebody else's podcast, the My Dad's Car podcast, before. And it's something that I've kind of vaguely got some knowledge about, but I really wanted to know a bit more of the ins and outs, and so I thought I'd invite Dad to come and sit in the back seat of Peggy and have a bit of a chat with me about how the whole idea came about, why we started doing it, what sort of cars were involved in it, and also why we stopped doing it. So we're going to invite Dad to sit in the back, have a chat with us about the concept of a Christmas car, what makes a good Christmas car, and then learn a bit more about kind of the sort of journeys that my parents were taking in them. So without further ado, let's get Dad in the back seat. So we're joined now by my dad, who's sat in the back of Peggy, and we've probably got a lot of podcasts that we should probably at some point record together. But we're going to start with what I think you probably think is the least interesting of your cars.
Yeah, something like that, yes.
But I was on a podcast a little while back called My Dad's Car, and these guys were absolutely fascinated by the concept of a Christmas car, and I thought, what better topic for the one before Christmas this year than to explain the concept of a Christmas car and perhaps give some people who are listening a reason to buy another car.
Always a good idea. A good idea. You can never have enough.
So let's start with kind of, I guess, some context as to why you got into having to buy Christmas cars. So when did it start?
It started around about 85, 86. I was in the Air Force at Wittering at the time, and I lived fairly close to the base, and I had as a daily runner a Hillman Imp, a 1971 Hillman Imp.
Yep.
And that was my daily runner. My other car that I had at the time was a 1935 Singer Le Mans.
CMT.
And that was the only two cars that I had.
Only two cars, because most people would probably just have the one car, but those were the two cars that you had. Weren't, I guess, the most practical for long distances, but there was times when you used to take CMT pretty long distances.
Oh yeah, if we needed to go away or we're going on holiday, or there was a club trip or something like that, then yeah, that wasn't a problem. But realistically, you can't get the clothes and the presents and everything else that you need into an open top 1930s car.
Yep.
And get them at the other end in one piece. So that's the concept came about because, you know, we needed to carry. I have three brothers. I had a mum and dad at the time. I had other people.
They had wives and girlfriends
and all this sort of stuff. So we had an awful lot of presents. We are a big present family, and Christmas always meant a lot to us. And we always sort of had a trip up to. I was in, as I say, at Wittering, which is just outside Stamford.
Yep.
And my parents were up in Northumberland.
Yep.
And so therefore I had to make the trip up and down, and it was a case of that time of year it was easier to go and, well, we found out that there was a car auction near Bourne.
Yep.
And so we went across there, and that's how it all started.
So you would travel up from Wittering to Northumberland in a car that you had bought at an auction?
Yeah, the criteria was we'd go over to the auctions sort of middle of November.
Yep.
And see what was coming through, and if there was anything that was big that had tax on it, because the cars were sold with tax back then.
Yeah.
And it had insurance that would last me through to MOT that would last me through till sometime in the new year.
Yeah.
So then it could then go back into the auctions with possibly some tax left on it, definitely some MOT left on it.
Yeah.
And I would hopefully recoup my money, or it wouldn't have cost me that much. It was less than it would have been to hire a car.
Yeah. So what was the first car that you got?
The first car that we got, we think, is a Vauxhall Victor FE. It was a big blue car. It was a huge, great thing.
Yeah. And how did it compare to driving like the Imp and the CMT at the time.
It was obviously an awful lot bigger engine and everything else, and it was a lot more space inside it and everything else, and it meant that simple things like packing, you didn't have to
Think
if
about
that goes
it.
in there, then that means there's enough space over here for this bit. It was just throw it all in. You had the whole back seat. There was only myself and Caroline, your mum, at the time. So there was only the two of us, and so it was a case of just go on up with a bit of luxury and lots of heat in the car and everything else sort of thing. So proved to be quite a reliable car, because we ended up selling that one to your granddad.
So the first one never went back into the auction?
No, the first one never went back into the auction. That went to your mum's dad.
Yeah.
Granddad, and he had it as his run around for quite a while.
So you'd take it up to Northumberland, and then you would be up there for a few days, and then if I remember rightly, you'd come back down around Mum's birthday, which is in between the two.
Yeah, Mum's birthday is on the 28th of December, so she always tells me that we always spend her birthday on the A1 going up and down. We used to try and keep things fair between the two families, that we'd go up to my mum's for Christmas, and have Christmas and everything else up there, and then your mum's mum, and granddad.
They had the big New Year's parties.
They had a big New Year's party, so we used to come down and we'd help them set that up, and we'd run the bar for them and everything else, because they used to rent a scout hut, and they'd put their own bar into it, and all the food and all the rest of it, and decorate it all. So we used to come down and help them all with that sort of thing.
So obviously with Grandad buying that one wasn't too much of a problem, because you lived quite local to him at that point, so it wasn't that you were then without a car in the new year.
No, that's it. Yeah, so as I say, it wasn't a case of we couldn't get home sort of thing. Yeah, it was just a case of he saw it on the drive and says, oh, I could really do with another one, because he had a 1966 Vauxhall at the time, a Vauxhall Victor 101.
That's what Mum had learnt to drive in.
That was a bench seat, column steering, column change, and that. And he loved his Vauxhall. And so therefore it was, I didn't ask him to buy a car. He wanted another Vauxhall because he liked his Vauxhall. Yeah. And so he said, well, can I have that one from you, instead of putting it back in the auction? So it was just a case of, well, it cost me this much. If you want it, that's it.
Yeah. So the following year, what did you get?
The following year, well, I don't know if it was every year that we did it.
Because there was some years where you had another car that was more practical.
Yeah. The next one that we can sort of think of was, we bought a Citroën CX Palace.
Yes. And I think they're really cool now, and you can't believe that there's this big cult following of them.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was, I didn't know anything about Citroëns at the time, but your mum said, well, we'll definitely get everything in the back of that one, because it was huge. It was a tank. I didn't know anything about it, but the first thing that I realised on it was how good the brakes are.
Yep.
Because the system is all hydraulic. It's a hydraulic pressure system, and instead of having to put your foot on the brake harder, all you're doing is opening a valve further, and the brakes are just absolutely tremendous.
Yeah.
I like that, and the fact that there's just a centre spoke on the steering wheel. So the steering wheel is obviously round, and then you just got one bar that comes down to the bottom of it, and it was just we didn't know anything about the suspension as such at the time, so on the drive up to Northumberland, we noticed that it was getting lower, and we thought, oh, this must be just due to the speed that we're cruising at, that it just goes down just to make it more aerodynamic.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It snapped a fan belt, and the pump wasn't working.
Oh.
So we ended up finishing the trip, because we couldn't get another belt on the day that we were going up, sort of thing. So we got another one when we were up there, but it meant that we finished the trip
on the bump stops.
On the bump stop sort of thing, yeah. So, but yeah, it was good.
So once you'd fixed the fan and stuff, was it quite a nice ride? Because lots of people say really nice things about how it drives.
It was lovely.
And stuff.
And as you know, when you go up to Grands's and everything else, there was two Fords.
Yeah.
And it never bothered us, because we could just lift the suspension right up.
Yep.
And some of the times you go through the Fords through the summer and it was like a little trickle. And
Yeah.
then sometimes it was a foot plus deep.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we've been down there when we've seen it. It's sort of the markers that go up to 6 or 8 feet.
Yeah, so when we were down there the other weekend, you could see that the marker was really clean up to like 3 foot, and Jamie was like, that got really high.
Yeah. So it used to get really high, and obviously you could get to the house without going through them. But the easiest thing was to go down this little lane and through the 2 Fords, and then you were almost at Grands's sort of thing. So the suspension was and the brakes is what I remember about that car, and the size of it.
Yeah. Rather than going through all of them, because how many years do you reckon? When did we stop?
It all depended on where we were, because I was obviously in the Air Force
Yeah.
right up until sort of 12 odd years ago, something like that. It all depended on where we were as to whether there was an auction. So when we were at Wittering, there was an auction.
Mm-hmm.
When we were in Chester, there was an auction near us.
Yeah.
When we were in Hampshire and London, there wasn't really. So one of the times when we were in London, the Christmas car had to be the Hillman Imp.
Yeah. So it was more compact packing.
It was, well, yes, but the
or
other
smaller presents.
The smaller presents would have been a good idea, but I'd made my mum and dad a garden bench.
Yes, the horseshoe benches.
I made a horseshoe bench for them. Your other granddad supplied all the horseshoe blanks.
Yeah.
Because he worked at a place that made these, and then they send out the blanks to the farriers, and the farriers then tweak them to the shape of the horse. So he supplied me with all the blanks, and I made these up, made this bench up as a Christmas present for them. But we only had the Hillman Imp at the time, and so what we then had to do was we then had to make a tow bar for the Hillman Imp, and then all the wiring for the Hillman Imp, and we had to borrow a trailer, and so we ended up trailering this up.
And they're not light.
No, they're not right now. It was probably well over its towing capacity and everything else. But we got up there on Christmas Eve, and we snuck it into the garden and just parked it in the garden. Unloaded the thing, carried the bench into the garden, put it down. We knew all the curtains would be shut anyhow.
Yeah.
Went in, said hello and everything else, and then that was it. So into Christmas, and then obviously when all the Christmas presents were opened and everything else was done, it was a case of, there's one other present, and you better undo the curtains, sort of thing. And where the hell's that come from? How have you got that here? That was an exception to the size of the Christmas cars, but as I say, that was one that we had to then make a tow bar for.
Even if you'd have had the CX that year, it wouldn't have fitted in the
No,
car. You'd have still had to tow it.
We would have had to do something with it to get it out, to get it up there.
Yeah. And that would have been pretty much the length of the A1 from where you lived in London all the way up to Grants. You'd have done the length of the A1 in a Hillman Imp towing a horseshoe bench.
Yep, that's it. Yeah. So that was it wasn't the fastest trip, but the Imp it had no overheating problems. I've never had any problems with the Imps at all that I've had. All the ones I've had overheating problems or anything else, despite the fact all the tales you hear of people. But no, it was a case of it was really quite reliable, and it got us up there and drove us around, and we had that one for many years until it eventually died, because at the time they were cheap. You could buy another one.
So we had them when we lived in Chester, and they were particularly important then, because not only did you have the presents, the clothes, but also kids and all of the accoutrements that had to. So me and my sister. So at the time, you were dailying bigger older cars, because I remember you had the Vogues.
Yeah, so we had the bigger Vogues and that sort of thing. So we had the bigger cars then as a daily. Yeah. Because I only lived again about 5 miles away.
And that's the benefit of being in the Air Force, was how close our housing was to
That's it. So I could either cycle in or drive in or whatever else. So so we used to drive in, but again we had the bigger cars. Or one time when we were there, the Vogue or whatever we had, or we didn't have something, so we went to the auctions, and your mum said, I quite like that Renault 19. We've never had one of them, so we had a look at it, and the engine sounded good and it drove, so we put a bid in, and it was only afterwards we found out that the sunroof didn't work, the electric windows didn't work, the wipers didn't work. None of the electrics worked at all. And so we thought we'd bought a right pup here. And then we looked into it and found out that somebody had taken all the fuses out. So there was none of the auxiliary fuses were in the fuse box at all. So it had either been taken out because somebody wanted the fuses, or somebody had taken it out in the hope that they would get a cheaper car.
So they'd seen it, like gone and viewed it at the auction, possibly taken all the fuses out in the hope that it put someone else off. Yeah. They weren't expecting you guys to not check the fuses.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we bought it, fitted all the fuses, everything worked, and it was a lovely car.
Yeah. Did that one stay any longer?
That one stayed a bit longer. Yeah, that one stayed for a little bit longer. Some of the cars did stay for a bit longer. You know, it was a case of your mum got sick of me swapping around with the insurance, or it was a case of, well, that's quite nice, that's quite comfortable, well, it's quite economical or whatever else. So some of them did stay longer, but they all came in with the purpose of the Christmas run. And it's how well they behaved as to whether they went straight back, you know, or it might be a case of I was going out the country, so therefore there was no point in keeping it for any longer, so it went away. We might have liked the car, but we didn't need it.
Yeah. So was there any that were particularly bad?
I never really liked Vauxhalls, despite the fact I bought that first one. I never really liked Vauxhalls, and I never really liked the Fords. We had a Ford Granada. There was nothing wrong with that, and again, that's another one that your granddad had, because your two uncles were into Fords, and so therefore they would look after it a little bit for him.
Yeah.
So I never really liked it, but there was nothing wrong with it. It was a huge, great big Granada.
Yeah.
You know, there was loads of space again.
It did the run, but it wasn't one that you were ever tempted in keeping.
And again, you know, he saw it and he needed a car at the time, so he said, well, you know, if you're selling it, can you bear us a mind? So yeah, okay. We kept it until he wanted it, and then that was, you know, that was the only reason that one kept, sort of thing. So.
Did he ever buy any when you were living in Chester, and then you have the problem of having to get back from Stamford or get it back over to Stamford?
No, he never bought a Christmas car of us in Chester. He bought I found him a Triumph 1500 front wheel drive when we were in Hampshire.
Yeah.
And he was in Stamford, and so therefore it was a case of I had to then get it back up. We had to go down, pick the car up from wherever it was that we bought it, get it back home, check it over, and then get it up to him for him. But yeah, that was the only one that was a bit difficult to. But again, that was when your mum moved. Then she followed us in the other car, and we just took two cars up,
and then came back in the one.
Yeah.
What was your favourite one that you had?
We quite liked the BMW 2002 Tourer.
Yeah, you kept that one for a while.
We kept that one for a while, and we used to use it for trailering.
Yeah.
Because we used to do a lot of distance things with the old car.
Yeah. With CMT, the 35.
The 35 single Le Mans. So we would sometimes trailer that to somewhere, and then we had a friend that would then drive the car on the trailer.
Yeah.
And we would then do a rally or whatever else in it, and then put it back on the trailer. But we didn't realise that the Tourers weren't supposed to tow as much as we were towing, and we found out that it was just cracking in half. The back end of the car was just breaking away.
Yeah.
But it had air suspension, so when we put the weight onto the car, we could then pump the air suspension up, the airbags up, and then that would just assist it. So it always sat flat, and it always, didn't mind that there was a big weight on the back, sort of thing.
Other than the fact it was cracking.
Yeah, other than the fact that we killed it, basically. Yeah, unfortunately. And they're such a nice car and such a rare car now, and quite sought after, really. But no, we killed that one.
That's a shame. Yeah. But CMT was having a nice time.
Oh yeah, we were having a great time, and the friend at the time that was driving it with his wife and everything else, they were having a great time, because we were saying, well, we'll pay for your hotel and everything else if you'll you'll come with us and drive the car, sort of thing, back. So I think
that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that was before we had the faith in the older car, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So now it's just a case of, well, if we have to drive it, we have to drive it, and if it breaks down, then good old RAC, AA, whatever it is, will take us back.
Yeah. Did any of the Christmas... Because obviously buying a car in November and not knowing it that well by Christmas might put some people off. did any of the Christmas cars not make it? Or?
No, so we had problems. So we had the belt went on the
The
Plus.
CX, yeah.
We had I think the Granada was automatic, and I'd never had an automatic, and we drove halfway up the A1 with it in second gear instead of drive, and we were your mum's there giving it, what's wrong? She says, no, nothing, and I'm there looking around trying to think what was the problem.
What's making all the noise?
Why is it not running as well as it had been running and everything else? And it's only because it had been knocked into second as opposed to into drive. But but no, they all went, and they all lasted the time and did what they wanted to do, and it was. We won on some and we lost on some, but either way, it was a case of it didn't. We would have had to hire a car, and it was cheaper than doing that.
Yeah. So what things would you have looked for in the auction as being like a telltale sign that the car wasn't going to make the trip?
Well, it was just rust. You didn't have the MOT checkers and all these sorts of things now to see what the history of the car was.
Yeah.
All it was. Is it pumping out loads of smoke? Is there any big rust on it and everything else? And that was about it, really.
And get it running and hear it running.
Yeah, get it running and bounce the corners to see what the suspension was like, and that was about it. And but yeah, you didn't have the added attractions you've got at the moment, where you can put the number plate onto the MOT checker and say, oh, that's had an awful lot of welding and an awful lot of problems done in the last umpteen years. So it was just a case of get on your back, go underneath it, have a look around and check things over. Yeah.
If you could have one of the Christmas cars back, what would it have been?
I would have liked to have had a combination. I thought the brakes and everything else on the Citroëns were just so phenomenal.
Yeah. Because you had a BX as well later.
We had a couple of BXs.
Yeah.
That we quite liked as well. I never realised until you said you wanted to do this that we looked through and realised we had the CX and two BXs, and I thought, oh, there's a bit of a theme there, but we haven't got any now. So. So I like those. We like the BMW for the tailgate and the fact it opened up. Another Christmas car that we had was the Husky.
Yes, and that was popular with Grandad as well, but you wouldn't hand that over.
Yeah, that was a Hillman Imp, but as a van, but it was a Husky, which is a van shape, but with back seats.
And windows down the
sides, but you could just fit so much into it. But again, that was a friend of ours that he wanted a car, so I said, well, if you want a car, it'll have to be one that I'll work on. So he bought that, and then I said, well, I need a car to go to Christmas and take all the stuff up.
Yeah.
So we had that one, because he'd then bought a Volkswagen, which is what he really wanted, but I said I wouldn't work on it.
Because I remember you saying with the Husky that they were so good in that you could basically fit a whole fridge in the back.
We were in London at the time, and we could move house with it because you could fit the fridge in and everything else. And the tailgate just opened up and above your head, so you could stand there when it was raining, and you had like a huge great metal umbrella over the top of your head, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So very rare cars now, but very sought.
There was that lovely pink one at the NEC this year, though.
Yes. Yeah.
That was very cool. Yeah.
But no, my one was white, and it was a very, very bright white, and it used to bounce off the bonnet because the lad had it painted and everything else. And so it was just a very bright white, and it was just
Grandad used to call it the Ghostbusters one, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's like the British answer to Ecto 1. Our ghosts are smaller over here.
Absolutely, yeah, and more refined.
So when did we stop getting Christmas cars? Because there was a period where I remember that we were using like the Imp and the Riley Elf and the Vogues as dailies, and then I remember the last Vogue being sold, and I remember Steph being very sad about it because it was her favourite car. And that was in Coningsby, wasn't it? That we sold that.
Yeah. But that's when we then started, the people carrier type thing started coming around, and so it was then easier then to get a people carrier for carrying all the things we needed for two young children.
Yeah.
Be it prams or whatever else.
Or friends to go to guide camps and stuff like that.
That sort of stuff. So that's kind of when it sort of stopped, is once the people carriers came onto the scene and we were starting buying those, then we didn't need a bigger car because that's what we had at the time, and we could fit everything in that. Be it you took a seat out or whatever else, the space was there for it.
Yeah. But now you've kind of gone back to having Imps as a second car.
Yeah.
Do you think when Mum stops working, you'll go to kind of back to having totally classics and investing in a Christmas car?
If we can get rid of some of the cars, we've got too many.
Yeah.
We've got too many to maintain at the moment. So yes, if some of them could go, then yes, then having just a car that we can get and sell. But it all depends on, well, I suppose you can sell them online now again.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier to go and see them and start them up and have a choice, and you go there with an open mind, and what you come away with isn't necessarily what you went for.
Yeah.
You set your limit and you went for it, sort of thing, and then yeah.
Was there ever one that you bid on that you thought you wanted but didn't get and then had to get something else?
Yeah, but you don't know what they were. You've forgotten all of those ones. Yeah, you bid on some and you say, well, no, that's just
it's got too much.
Yeah,
Let's go for this next one that's coming up.
Yeah. As I say, we were never tied to, which is why we ended up with some of the foreign cars. A lot of the Citroëns and the Renaults and all these sorts of things, you seem to get more for your money at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was standard in the cars as opposed to extras.
Yeah.
Which was what was with Fords and Vauxhalls. So the older Fords and Vauxhalls, they have all the different ranges within the model, and they have all the different bits into them as opposed to the other the foreign cars seem to have it as standard.
Yeah, because even with like a BX, even your lowest level would have had the really nice suspension and the really good brakes.
Yeah, and
because that's the feature of the car.
Yeah, and they would have simple things, the radios. They would have had radios in them, and a lot of the other cars didn't.
And that's important for a Christmas trip because you've got to play your Christmas tunes as you're driving up the A1.
You've got to play your tapes, your CDs, and that weren't about, so it was tapes and everything else. I think so.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think I've learnt a lot more about the concept of Christmas cars, and perhaps once Peggy has had all the restoration work next year, me and Jamie will have to get into proper Christmas cars so that the oldies can stay safe at home and we can...
That's it, yeah. It's a case of, you just get the experience of having fun in something else.
Yeah, and then passing it on, which I think will be the part that I find the hardest.
Well, yes, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. And Jamie, if it's a certain car, then he might not want to sell it either.
No, yeah. Because I reckon a VW Scirocco would have made an excellent Christmas car, and I reckon he would struggle to hand that on.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
That's not a problem.
Okay, so that was really interesting. I learned so much about these cars that I had kind of a vague knowledge of. Like, I knew that we'd had a CX and I knew that we'd had a BX and some of the other cars, but I hadn't really learned much about the whole auction process and the fact that there were some years where they weren't needed because of, or weren't available because of the auctions and stuff. And actually afterwards, Dad remembered that some of the reason they didn't need them so much in London was the fact that Mum had worked in a car hire company at the time that was run out of what is now once again the Ace Cafe. And so that also fed into some of the years that they didn't need a Christmas car, because she was able to get a car through them if there was one left in the pool at the time of Christmas. So really interesting idea, and I've noticed that there's been a few people who have bought kind of big barge cars at this time of year to look after their more classic cars. And so I think people are doing this Christmas car tradition without necessarily realising what they could call it and the fun that they could have with it. So perhaps this podcast will get the idea out there a little bit more, and more people will be tempted to give it a little go over winter. I think winter runner is a topic that a lot of people use, or term that people use, but a Christmas car sounds a lot more fun. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I know that there's lots of other stuff that I could talk to Dad about, and we'll have to get him on the podcast again. But hopefully that's given you a little bit of taster as to the wild collections of cars that my mum and Dad had over the years. In the meantime, have a very Merry Christmas, drive safely whether you're doing a Christmas car run or not, and happy motoring.